What's up, everyone? It is Austin and Matt here, and we are here to answer all your brick questions, urban questions, development questions, real estate questions. We're really excited about all the questions we got in. And so we're just gonna jump in, we're gonna start choosing, and we'll get into it. Hey, I've been following you for a while and really admire your work. My husband and I, thank you. My husband and I are going to start building our house this year, not far from you in Springfield, Missouri. A structural brick home isn't really in our budget at the moment, but I still really want to achieve a worn brick look on our exterior. I find that so many red brick homes that are new construction totally miss the mark. Do you have a recommendation for what type of bricks we should use in order to achieve a more timeless look? That's a great question. I completely understand that a structural brick masonry home isn't in your budget. That's something that we struggle with too, especially with the cost of construction today being so expensive. But we are actually able to build a structural masonry house or even a brick veneer house that's very quality and also achieves such a similar look from the exterior that most people would not know. Because you're right, most brick veneer buildings today, I would say that they do feel very sterile. Like we talk about how brick is a very human material. It's the size that fits the human hand. It's this very humble material. It's clay, and it's sculpted, but brick can quickly go from a human material to like a very sterile, like prisons are built out of brick too. And the main thing that we think about is you can have an extruded brick. An extruded brick is something that's got very sharp edges because it literally was extruded out of a machine. And so it's very sharp. And then the masons today, they used to not necessarily do this, they lay it all very neat. So all the brick are very perfect, and then they strike it with what's called a jointer, and then all the joints are perfect. And then everything just feels so perfect, and then this once human material now feels very machine made. So we always use what's called, actually, a tumbled brick. And you can see this brick, so this is not a wood molded brick, this is a new brick. That's been dry tumbled. So after they've kiln dried it, then they tumble and it knocks off all the edges and makes it really soft. And it really looks like a reclaimed brick, even though it's new. And this is different, by the way, this dry tumbled than green tumbled. I don't have any green tumbled here, but green tumbled kind of like can look quite fake. And so we really like modular brick that are this size. And then we also like the tumbled look. So it gives it this really soft feel. And then we strike our joints with a tuck point and let it be a little bit messy, I would say, rather than making it all perfect.
Right. And another piece of that formula that you can use, what you're seeing on your wall, you have your brick and your mortar, and adding color to that mortar rather than using just the plain gray type N masonry mortar that we usually use can really set the look of the wall apart and make it feel a lot warmer and less mechanical. Yeah,
you actually don't want it to be perfect for one. You actually want it to be a little bit just like time worn, unless you're building a very, very, very like classical civic building, then maybe making it all perfect makes sense. But for most houses and stuff, you kind of want that messier look like you're talking about. Another really simple thing that you can do in veneer that most people don't do is when you're doing an arch, say you're spanning over a window, rather than just putting a steel lintel, the lintel is just this piece of steel they put across so they can lay bricks straight across, just like this, it goes across. Well, rather than laying an arch, which is how a brick is really meant to be, when you're spanning an open, so you can do an arch, but if you're doing an arch, you can do rather than what we would call a single row lock. So a lot of people would just, a row lock, it would go like this around the window. We can actually do 2 row locks, so it's a thicker arch, and then you can actually corbel one out so it goes like this. So you could even turn it this way so it makes this pattern as it goes along the arch, and then you got all this detail because when you corbel out even a 3/4 of an inch like this, what you get is a shadow line, and so you get depth, and that will start setting your building apart from just a conventional veneer building really, really, really fast. And the last one is a stone sill, rather than the bottom of your sill, like literally under the window. Most people just put like brick like this, and this is the window sill, just a bunch of brick next to each other. Well, instead of doing that, we do solid stone sills like this, and obviously it's longer. Imagine a whole window sitting on top of this. And this is so much more durable for one, even in a veneer setting, because it keeps water from getting inside, but it's also beautiful because you see this instead of just brick. So it adds another material in. And we used natural stone, so wherever you are, you might be able to find limestone or granite, and this is hard sandstone. You can also use cast stone or something like that.
And like with the tumble brick, you can see the nice rough chiseled edge that was on that piece, bringing in that more organic, natural textures, not something that looks like it was made by a machine and never touched by a human. Can really help warm it up, add a little more detail, visual interest, and like Austin mentioned, shadow lines really make things pop. Okay, next we have a question. I notice you use reclaimed bricks. Is this preferred, or is there a reason not to utilize new bricks in your construction process? So great question related to the previous one. Our use of reclaimed bricks is usually tied to aesthetics. You can get a great patina on the bricks, some variation, maybe there's some old paint on it. As an aside, I say usually during COVID, lead times on many construction materials exploded, and I think when you were ordering bricks for a couple projects, it was over a year, right?
Yeah, it's usually a few weeks, and then suddenly we were ordering a brick, it would just jump to over a year, so it was completely untenable.
So in instances like that, we were using reclaimed brick out of necessity because that was available more quickly, but really we like using both reclaimed and new bricks, and in many cases it's more cost effective and easier for the masons to use new brick. And it also, when you get reclaimed brick, it comes in on a pallet and it's been cleaned wherever it was coming from, but inevitably there's still a lot of mortar on it, makes it harder to lay, there's different sizes. So the upshot of it is the beautiful look and patina you can get that you can't quite perfectly replicate with a new brick, but there are some really great dry tumbled, as Austin mentioned, bricks on the market that have a nice package or variety of colors on them and look almost reclaimed. We're building new buildings with new brick, and some people think they're older buildings.
Yep.
So it can really fool the eye. And another consideration is the type of mortar you use. You have to be really careful with mortar type with reclaimed brick because they're a lot softer. They were historically fired at lower temperatures and were softer. So you have to use a lime-based mortar or a softer mortar because we always want our mortar to be softer than the brick. That's the sacrificial element. With some of these new brick, they're 6,000 psi or higher.
Which is harder than concrete, by the way. Most concrete, like your driveway, the road is like 3,500 to 4,000 psi. So modern brick meaning 6,000 psi is harder than concrete, which most people don't realize.
Yeah, super durable, great to use for pavers, and you can also, in some instances when appropriate, use non-lime mortar, just a more conventional type N, more conventional today type N mortar, and that's cheaper, more easily accessible in the marketplace. We're working to change that. We want to have our supply chain with lime and different types of mortars eventually, but for now, that's a way to be more cost effective and a perk of new brick.
And that's one thing, to add on to what Matt's saying, especially about the softness. So not only were old brick not kiln dried as hard, and a lot of old brick are under 3,000 PSI, but you also have what's called, facing brick and interior brick, because back in the day, it was a lot more expensive, you could say, to fire everything to a certain temperature. It's harder, right? More expensive, more fuel. So they would have the harder brick being the face brick, the exterior brick of the building, but then they would put these softer salmon brick that are much more orange, and they're just way softer and not kiln dried as much, which works fine structurally. They just don't manage water as well. They absorb more. The problem is when you're tearing down an old building, because most reclaimed brick doesn't come from a veneer building coming down, it comes from a structural masonry building coming down, whether that's a double wide or triple wide building. And so when you take that down, all those bricks get mixed up, and then you don't know what's what, and then you could end up having salmon brick. And so if you're building a structural masonry house with exterior facing walls, just got to be careful. Also, like Matt said, on expense, not only can the brick be expensive, you got to be really careful on the labor, because not only whoever you're buying it from, they'll make sure the top is cleaned very well, maybe even the top couple layers. But once you get down into the pallet, you might get into all sorts of stuff where the mason is having to take each brick and clean it off before laying, which is very different. For anyone that's seen brick being laid, someone that's laying brick in a straight line, they'll be like, lay. So it's like way slower when you're having to chip it, blah, blah, set it down, beat it down. It's a different thickness. Sometimes they'll vary in sizes even. So you just need to have the budget for it. And also know that you can have things like lead on it and stuff. So you just want to know where the brick's coming from, that it's a reputable person, and you've got the budget to deal with it, and you use the right mortar. If you use too hard of mortar, it will destroy the brick.
One more word of caution. When you're buying it, if you're buying a new brick, you can go to a local showroom, put eyes on it, buy a little bit, build a mock-up. Buying reclaimed brick sight unseen can be risky because the color in the photo might not be perfectly representative. Like Austin said, brick can be stacked on the outside of a pallet and different on the inside. And we've had that happen before where reclaimed brick showed up and wasn't quite what we expected. So always, if you could source it locally or in your region where you could put eyes on it before buying, that's always good.
What are the easiest aspects to value engineer and still maintain authenticity and beauty? Gosh, we could probably go off on this one for a while, but the first thing that comes to my mind is simplifying. Like and here's a really easy way to simplify it. Build in a rectangle. Start with a rectangle. Like literally the footprint, if you're looking top down in your house, it could look like this. A lot of our houses are single rectangles or rectangles bolted together. And that might sound not profound, but go drive around to all your neighborhoods wherever you are and look at the houses and see how many are built in triangles. If it was built pre-1940, it's probably very triangle-based houses. If they're built in the last 40, 50 years, you get all sorts of corners because as building got cheaper, as stick framing really got cheaper, which is quite an amazing invention, stick framing. It's amazing because it's fast and cheap and still pretty quality for being fast and cheap, you could say. But it allows you to do all these corners, and then you get these crazy roof systems, and then people try to add dormers to it, and all sorts of details to make it interesting. Because we hear this comment a lot about, suburban subdivisions. People will say, yeah, it's just a bunch of cookie cutter houses. It's not good. But we like to talk about here, it's not that people like cookies. It's just that they're bad cookies, right? Because all the greatest towns and cities and neighborhoods in the world have a very narrow range, but diversity in a narrow range. So even the neighborhood that I'm in, which is a 1920s, 1930s neighborhood, very similar houses. They're almost all brick, almost all Tudor style, almost all same floor plan. And people love this neighborhood. We love the neighborhood. People drive through and get compliments out of it. And so simplifying rectangles and then building a little bit, then you can actually afford to get good materials because you're not spending all this money on these irrelevant materials. It's keep it simple, keep it basic, and you can actually make it really beautiful that way. I mean, 100%. But we could go on this for a while. I'm curious what you've got.
I think that's really the most effective way to do it is by being very intentional with your design and not creating unnecessary cost by trying to add visual interest. You can actually save money by being authentic because then the simple details like the arches, the sills we talked about before are adding so much visual richness that you don't need to contrive, 3 gables on the front of your McMansion to add that. Beyond that, it's really a balancing game. Frankly, the easiest way to value engineer is probably, again, in design and space planning and maybe building a little smaller but at a higher level of quality, because a lot of the compromises we think about in value engineering, it is a compromise. You are probably changing the quality of your finish or your structure if you're eliminating a certain amount of cost. We and sometimes the people we're building for can be frustrated because there's no way to snap your fingers and eliminate costs. And that's really a kind of sad state of where the construction industry and costs are at. Costs have risen about 40%, would you say, since COVID?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it's pretty rough.
Yeah, so really, starting up front and being intentional with your design makes it a lot easier to be cost effective throughout the build.
You hear so much today about breaking up the massing. I just cannot tell you how busy these houses are, and you've got not only different gables stuff, but you'll have so many materials. It's like they'll do stone down here on this bump out, and then it's brick elsewhere, and then you got some stucco up here and some siding. It's like, dude, you'd be so much better off just doing all brick with, some stone sills or something like simple, basic. That's yeah.
Yeah, and we're not saying every house has to be rectangle.
Oh, of course not.
But compose your house out of rectangles.
Right.
And, maybe 2 or 3 rectangles, not 7 or 8. Here's a good one and relevant to the next year in building culture. Have you considered building townhomes or a multi-dwelling unit building? The answer is yes, we've considered, and we're excited to be moving forward with that. We're embarking on our Townsend project in downtown Edmond right now. Edmond is a small city about 20 minutes north of Oklahoma City, and we're working on our Townsend development, which has about 20 townhomes in addition to some small multi-unit buildings. So we think that masonry is super conducive to that type of construction. There's a lot of great historic precedent to look at, and so we're really excited to get started with that.
Yeah, no, that one's going to be really fun. I mean, if there's anywhere that structural masonry can make more sense economically, it's with townhomes and things like that, because you've got party walls, you've got the fire rating. We're building a little bit smaller, so we're getting really nice materials, and because is more urban, all the materials start mattering more because you're closer to them, but also because it's smaller spaces, we can choose higher materials. So our courtyards are brick pavers and cobblestones and things like that. So we're really, really, really excited about this project.
Yeah.
What's the best backyard project for amateurs? A garden arch, a fireplace? I love it. Can we go in the backyard real quick? So this is my backyard. It's kind of a mess right now. I've gotten injured, so I haven't finished a lot of stuff, and we've got a fence that's falling down. But this little archway, these crepe myrtles kind of frame it before they got killed in an ice storm a couple years ago. They used to be big. That's why I built that there. But this arch is a little bit more advanced, but you can look at, so we did this paving right here, and we did this in a herringbone pattern, and that was actually it's pretty dang easy to do because you're just leveling something out, and you can make a base of sand, or you could lay mortar down and slap it in there and put brick down on top. There's several different ways to do it. So doing paving is really easy. We did really a small garden wall for a raised planter, and then also a little garden arch right here has such a huge impact for what it is. Like, people are kind of like shocked when they come back here and see it. And I mean, I did that over, I don't know, 5 weekends or something. The most annoying part about it was just carrying the brick back here and mixing the mortar myself, you know?
Yeah, that's a lot for one person to do. If you have a friend and you could tag team that,
it's
because
a lot better with a friend.
When you're doing it on a job site, it's usually a 2-person job or a crew level job, but you have multiple people. You have a laborer who's preparing the mortar, moving the brick, and then a mason. So as Austin mentioned in an earlier question, a mason, when he's moving down a wall like this, is sort of operating like a machine and laying several brick per minute. So that really helps speed things up.
When you get comfortable enough, try something new, because it's not whether you can build something like that, it's how long is it going to take you and how good is it going to look. Basically, if you're not skilled, you could still put something together that looks in that same shape. It would just be messy, brick wouldn't be even, and it might not be super structural, but you could do it. I also think just a simple fire pit is really easy to do. Just one little note, in addition to getting just kind of pretty brick, if you're doing that, you want to get what's called fire brick as well. That kind of lines it. So if you're building a fireplace, you get fire brick, which are fired even harder than this, so they can withstand the heat over and over. And so if we're building just a little circular or square outdoor fire pit, we'll just do a thin layer of our fire brick and then regular brick on the outside, so it's pretty. And yeah, that's probably one of the easiest things you can do. And it's cool because you get to use it and interact with it.
I told a guy I planned to build a garage and have structural brick walls. He said that won't be insulated. I'm thinking I need to ask someone who knows more than me about that. Will there be moisture or insulation problems with that? I think the shortest answer is it really depends on where you're located. If you were doing something like that here in Oklahoma or in another fairly temperate climate, it might be okay to have that be an uninsulated garage building. Brick, especially structural brick, doesn't like to be cold for prolonged periods, and its main enemy is freeze-thaw, water getting inside of there, freezing, and then expanding and deteriorating the masonry or the bricks. So if you're in the northeast or northwest or a really cold climate, I probably would be concerned about building that uninsulated brick garage. And there's a couple ways you could go about insulating that. But if you're in a more temperate climate, where you, if otherwise building a garage may or may not insulate it, it'd be fine to do it out of structural masonry. If you did want to insulate it, you could use one of the wall systems we use, which could be either using multiple wides and layers, so building a double wide wall with a cavity with insulation in it, and then ties spanning to additional brick on the other side. So really a cavity wall with structural brick on both sides and insulation in the middle, which we talk about a lot in some of our other videos. Or you could build a structural brick wall and then add a furring wall inside. What we often see when someone's retrofitting a brick building, where you have your structural brick wall and then a wood stud wall maybe held an inch off of that, and then insulation within that. And if you're doing that, something important to keep in mind is not to compromise the breathability of your brick wall. Water vapor moves through brick, as we've talked about, and so we don't want to create a vapor barrier there for condensation to occur somewhere in the wall. So if I were doing that in a garage, I might add that furring wall, not put anything in between the brick and the studs, and then you could put your insulation in, use a breathable form of insulation, so not spray foam, especially not closed cell spray foam. Mineral wool or fiberglass bats would be a good option there. We love mineral wool because it doesn't degrade with moisture. If you have something like fiberglass bat insulation, water gets on it, it starts breaking down, starts molding. So we really love mineral wool and use that wherever we can. Then you can put your sheetrock on the inside over that.
Yeah, you answered that pretty thoroughly. So, this will be fun to think about. What are your favorite building projects apart from your own? Gosh, that is a really good one. I'm just going to go with kind of the first things that come to mind. There is a project in Tempe, Arizona called Cul-de-sac. It's kind of a funny name, I will admit, but I really admire the project and the developers and the designers, Opticos, on it. I forget how many acres it is, but it's 2.5 miles from downtown Tempe, Arizona. I think it's around 17 acres, if I'm right. And it's this car-free urban neighborhood. And the reason I emphasize that it's 2.5 miles from downtown in Tempe, Arizona, is that it's a car-centric state and city, like Oklahoma is, and like much of the Midwest is, unless you're on one of the coasts. And they've managed to build a village of basically sixplexes. So there are 3-story buildings with most of them have 2 stories each floor, and they're quite close together, but not in a boring way, all in a straight line. I mean, if you Google cul-de-sac Arizona, Tempe, Arizona, and you look down, it's kind of this patchwork of all these buildings, and they're kicked at different angles. And I just really admire, because what they're doing is very hard to get that through the city, to raise money on that, to convince investors. And what's so cool about it, the first phase that just leased up recently, they leased it up in like 12 minutes when they released it. As in, people want this. And you actually, on that one, you have to sign a waiver that you're not going to park, or this is my understanding, you have to sign a waiver that you're not going to park a car within a quarter mile, because there literally is no parking. I mean, it's on a light rail system to downtown. So that's one that I find very inspiring locally. Carlton Landing and Wheeler District, where we were building Carlton Landing, now we're building in Wheeler District. I just think they're really amazing examples in different ways. Wheeler District being one of the most urban T&Ds out there. As in, most of these kind of traditional neighbor developments, new urbanism, this mixed type stuff, a lot of it happens kind of like Newtown happens kind of a long ways away from a city, but Wheeler is a mile from downtown. What are some other ones? I mean, there's a lot of great ones around the country.
You took my first answer. I think what gets us most excited is projects that are, no, they're great. Is that in
Cat
Carolina?
Fiddle is South Carolina or North Carolina?
I'm not sure.
Oh, I forget. Yeah.
But that's what really gets us excited, especially as we're getting ready to embark on our Townsend project in Edmond, is looking at great placemaking. There's countless beautiful buildings going up around the country, but these development scale projects that are really designing for people and at a human scale, rather than around automobiles and traffic engineering, is really what gets us excited and what we admire and look to and try to learn from.
Yeah, and to be clear, I know this wasn't the question, but I own 2 cars that are sitting outside. When I talk about a car-free neighborhood, I am not anti-car. We are pro-people. That's what I would say.
Yes.
And there's just a different way of thinking. It's when you're pro-people, that includes cars, because cars are incredible tools of productivity when they're used in the appropriate manner. But kind of like that saying of if you're a hammer, everything's a nail.
Yeah.
It's kind of that thing where the car has become the only tool we use to get around, and then we build everything around that, and we forget how much we've lost of the human experience, of the idea of kids walking to school, just having actually kind of living in a community where you actually see people around. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff I won't get into, but just want to be really clear as building culture, because I hear this come up a lot where we start talking about pro-urbanism or pro-density or something. And I want to be very clear. Not all density is good. It's not that we're just saying everything should be dense. And by the way, density done poorly without the human in mind is horrible. Because it's just stuffing people together. It's really, we're thinking about it as a human scale and the human experience. And there's this really important blend, and it doesn't just happen by accident. It's through thought and intention and care. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we're definitely, to your point, not naive about it. It's really just where we put our priorities. You could probably count the number of cities in America that most people can effectively live in without a car in one hand. Cars are a fact of life. We just don't need to make them the first priority when we're designing the places that we live our lives.
And I would say there's another impressive project. I mentioned it when he was talking about Cat Fiddle Street. Is really unique, kind of organic urbanism. And actually that's what's kind of cool about cul-de-sac is they're kind of breaking the rules a little bit. There's a little more chaos. I would call it a little more organic urbanism rather than very like strict worked out things. And then of course there's Serenbe in Georgia and Seaside in Florida and Rosemary Beach and all those kind of like very big name new urbanists. But I think some of the things we get excited about are some of the smaller ones, not just big towns that are going in, but an acre infill site somewhere, well, kind of like what we're doing, or a Wheeler district, or the Cat Fiddle Street, which is actually quite small, but human, And
interestingly, a lot of those are taking inspiration from older cities and organic cities, and why are those cities planned organically and everything that we see now is planned rectilinearly? One main factor is that many of the cities they're looking to were planned or not planned and built before the automobile.
Yeah.
New urbanism is well received in Oklahoma City. It seems all anyone wants is Edmond Mcmansions. That's an interesting one, and I think the short answer is to look at the Wheeler District in Oklahoma City, which is Oklahoma City's only new urbanist development to date, and say yes. I mean, I think all you need to do is walk around Wheeler anytime, but especially in the evening as kids are getting home from school, you see people of all different ages moving through, families going to the restaurants that they can walk to 5 minutes from their house, kids running out to the playground, and that's been embraced. It's been very successful. We're thrilled to be building there. So I think the short answer is yes, and the follow-up to that is that one might think all anyone wants are suburban McMansions because that's all that's been built for a long time. The pattern of development here, we have very little shortage of land, and so we're able to keep building out and out and out with few constraints, and that's what's happened. But we're excited with our Townsend project to bring an alternative to downtown Edmond and offer people the upsides of a more urban lifestyle, that you can have a quiet green you're living on and still be able to walk within 5 minutes to a grocery store, a park, 30 or 40 businesses and restaurants. So I think the case for that type of lifestyle is really compelling. And it's just something that hasn't been done here too much. So we're really excited to be part of that.
And I have a few things to add to that, because I think when so many people think about, you're right. There's a number of things I want to say here. If you were to go around and knock on people's doors in Edmond or in your town, wherever you are, if you're in any kind of like Midwest town, and knock on a door and be like, how would you like to live in a smaller house with less garage, smaller yard, closer together, and pay more per foot for your house? They'd be like, no, thank you. That all sounds bad. But when you actually build a neighborhood that's intentionally designed, that are all those things, the houses are a little bit smaller, a little closer together, the garages are a little bit smaller, but it's actually curated. Mm-hmm. There are so many things you gain. Is it true that you still lose all those things that I said? Yes, but then you also gain community and neighborhoods and a neighborhood center and stuff that you can walk to in schools, and your kids can walk to school, and neighborhood events. And we like to say we don't sell square footage, we sell community, we sell relationships. We sell quality, and there's so many things that you gain. And so what our experience is, my experience personally, is for people that haven't seen it or lived it, they're just like, why would I want to do that? But for the people that have, they love it. The people that actually end up moving to Wheeler and living there and they experience it, there's a few percent that they go, that's not for me. But it's generally like, it's literally a few percent. And everyone else, when you ask them, do you like living here? They go, we love it. We're actually just buying another house because we got a smaller house, but now we're going to get a bigger one. Or our kids moved out, we're going to get a smaller one over here, but we're staying in Wheeler. And then the other thing, the last piece of this I would say is, it comes down to placemaking, creating an actual place, a neighborhood with a sense of identity and community. Because most people, when you just say, once again, okay, suburban living versus urban living, people just think Midtown. And I'm talking about, I could really mean any Midtown anywhere. Like, we all kind of know what that means, I think, where if you're in a decent sized city, a Midtown, close to downtown adjacent, and you got bars and restaurants and apartment buildings and maybe some condos. And so if you're someone that lives in the suburbs, like you might not want to go live in a condo building. That's a very different experience and feel than living in a neighborhood. So what we're talking about is building human urban neighborhoods that still focus on privacy, has outdoor space, things like that. So just so different than what people actually think about. So I think a lot of the objection is not
sort of misconception.
It's a misconception, first and foremost. Yeah. Not everyone, but largely speaking.
It comes down to what you're asking for out of the place you're living. And that might be, if you're asking for a big yard, that's important, but there's trade-offs there. Maybe you're getting your big yard and giving up the ability to walk to all these businesses. Instead, you're driving 15 or 20 minutes.
Or a real park, because that's what I think. Because I hear this one, like, we need a yard so our kids can play. Fair enough. You don't want them playing out on a busy street where they're going to get hit by a car. But you live in an actual neighborhood with an actually active park with houses, not just a park that's kind of leftover land somewhere. I mean, where the houses are facing it. It's actually part of it's a true civic space. Well, then your backyard, your place for playing is the park. And then, the benefit of that is the kids are playing with other kids and they meet friends. And then you kind of get this kind of free range kid thing going on that when it's just your private yard and you got your fort, you got it all. You got the pool, you got the fort, but then everything has to be so planned because you're calling and setting up plans to have a birthday party or someone's coming over from 7 to 9 p.m. and blah, blah, blah versus, hey mom, can I run to the park? Sure. Come back in an hour. And they go adventure. I mean, that's amazing.
It's better for the kids and you don't have to mow it.
Yeah. What is the vision of building culture and the driving force for building projects in the unique way that you do? Gosh, that is such a big answer. We think about building culture. We work at the intersection of purpose and profits. We are a for-profit business because I believe that there's nothing wrong with a 501c3 or a nonprofit, but I believe that profit is not a bad thing. It's a way of measuring something's success. Even now, it's not everything. But my point is, we believe in making profit, but we're not going to do it without purpose. Like the purpose of being in business is not to profit. It's the intersection of those two things. Number one. Number two, when we talk about the vision for building culture, I really have to go back to what do I believe? Because that informs what we do and how we do it. It informs everything. And what I believe and what we believe is people are so much more than just a collection of microprocessors in their brains and, gears and functions in their body, right? We're not just robots. You can't just give us food and shelter and we're good. Food and shelter and a 401k and every once in a while go out to eat somewhere or some cheap entertainment. And entertainment's important. We need all those things. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all that. But there's so much we don't know. And I think humans are so much deeper than the modern world likes to. We like to pretend we understand everything, I think. And so because we can dissect the human body and we know where the spleen is and what does what, like we're just pretend like we know everything. And so then we focus on just the very physical things that people need. Food, shelter, got to go to school, give them some entertainment every once in a while, boom, you're done. The problem is, as amazing as the world is, and the world really is amazing, the modern world, I mean, it is a miracle. We're launching rockets into space. We're on the verge of AI, whether that's a good or bad thing. You can walk out of a hip replacement surgery. Just stunning achievements. Yet people are increasingly sad, depressed, lonely, isolated, the substance abuse, the suicide epidemic, the health epidemic from, I know it sounds crazy and it sounds disconnected from building, but just stay with me for a second. I'm not going to list off a bunch of things, but whether it's the shocking statistics of diabetes in kids and obesity and stuff like that, and it's not just people's decisions, it's something else is going on here in my opinion. And I think we have to start thinking about our lives and humanity and our local communities as more than just a collection of the physical things that we need. And that comes, it's almost hard to express in some ways because we're not providing housing, we're building the human habitat. And how do we do that in a way that facilitates as much human flourishing for as many people as possible? And so it's not just about the buildings to us. It's not just about the developments. It's not just about the design. It ultimately comes down to people, and really an invitation to a more meaningful life. And it doesn't mean we can do that. We as architects and urban designers, and we are, or Matt's an architect. I am not, just to be very clear, for legal reasons. You never know. We cannot force human flourishing. You could build a perfect neighborhood, but it's up to the people that move there to create that culture. So there's great humility in what we do, because we can't make anything happen. But at the same time, there's a deep sobriety to what we do, in that you can design something so poorly, so bad, that it destroys the possibility for community, for culture, for entrepreneurship, for the independence of kids, that completely unsustainable ways that rely on debt and a poor use of natural resources. And frankly, that's what we've been doing. And so we're really trying to, and it's made its way through everything, whether it's the way that the construction industry works, the way the engineering industry works, the way the architecture industry works, the way the banking and appraisals and financing and development. And it's the system itself, I would say, is sick. And I don't think it means we need to destroy everything and start over, because I really cannot emphasize enough how much I value how amazing the world is right now. But with the amount of incredibly rapid innovation we've had in the past 100 years, really 200 years, of course we've gotten some things wrong. There is no, like in business, I mean, Matt and I, we're always testing ideas, and you think you know something, and then it's actually, no, it's over here. Oh, it's over here. And so I think we should approach questioning, like we should actually be looking back look at the outcomes that we have today. All the outcomes, whether that's climate change and natural resources and human health and connection and depression, all those kinds of things, and say, okay, well, let's back into the causes. And we believe that the built environment is a huge contributor of those, an outsized contributor. Of course, there are plenty of other contributing things to that. But that's really where we're starting at. That's the why, is we're trying to build things that can't be measured. Because everything we try to measure, and like the value is because, an Excel spreadsheet told us so. Everything can be measured in dollars and cents. And I'm a CPA, like I understand numbers, money, all that. But there's things that are valued beyond that. The difference between going to a coffee shop where you're not even friends, just like a coffee shop you go to regularly, and you know that you walk in, the barista's welcome, you go, oh, hey, what should I get today? And they chat and they tell you about the local roast. That to me is a heck of a lot worth $4 versus the drive-through Dutch Brothers coffee that's just a sugar nightmare, which, I'm not saying I never go through a drive-through, but the experience of one is purely an economic consumption an economic transaction, only about consumption, and the other one has something else.
And that one's often pulling money out of the local community too, and sending it to a corporation rather than fostering an entrepreneurial business or a small local business that someone's.
So it's how do you build great, beautiful, resilient, thriving places across all the different things. And here's the thing, we don't think we're the only ones doing good work. There are so many people doing good work in engineering, in architecture, in building. And all of the good ones will tell you the system is broken. Like we're not the only ones saying this. Anyone good is going to tell you something similar, even if we have kind of different perspectives on it. And so that's really what we're talking about, is we're trying to actually start not just us build a few houses, but we're advocating for things. We're working with cities. We're hoping to help other people do the same. And a lot of people are doing this across the country. So that way we make building about people again, and not the number of housing starts, how much it contributes to GDP. Oh my gosh, the interest rates and quarter base point changes. Once again, all important things, but that's not why.
To set the stage for human flourishing, like we said. You can't guarantee it, but we can set the stage.
Yeah.
And that things like beauty, things that you might think of as the usual drivers behind building and development, beauty or profit, play into it and are part of the equation. But the end, what those are leading to is people and their lives and setting the stage for them to live good lives.
And you hear us talk about durability a lot, which is where the masonry is coming in. We'll get into this in another one, but we're kind of expanding what we're doing building wise to go just beyond masonry, because just structural masonry doesn't make sense in every capacity that we're doing now that we're backing out and doing development and other things as well. And this is still, it's not like the mission has changed. It's just that it's grown, you could say. And so that's still its thing that we're pioneering and learning. And frankly, it's going to be a lot of work because brick plants are shutting down. They're not making this size brick anymore. I mean, there's a million problems. We're not giving up by any means. It's more like doubling down and just realizing it's a fairly long road and being okay with that. But the reason we talk about durability is because you cannot have sustainability without durability. And the second thing is, I think it's so important for a community and for a local identity to have this durability of an architectural fabric of things that have persisted for not just decades, but hundreds of years, where you're looking back at something and it's a storied building. I just saw an art. We just in Oklahoma City voted for a new Thunder stadium for the Oklahoma City Thunder, so professional NBA team. And from everything I can tell, I mean, I don't know a lot about these things, but the Thunder has been a huge deal to Oklahoma City, and it seemed like the team was going to leave if you don't do a new stadium, so you have to do a new stadium to keep them to stay, and they voted yes. So I'm not picking on anything about the decision or the vote, to be clear. But one line in the announcement really stuck out to me, and I'm going to get it wrong because I'm not quoting verbatim, but it was something like, it gave 3 reasons for why it needed to be a new stadium. The first 2 reasons were somewhat legitimate, and the third one was, and then the Thunder will be playing in a 21-year-old stadium, which is one of the oldest stadiums among the NBA. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? We think we need a new building because it's 21 years old, and it's more of this state of society that as a city, you have to build a new one every 20 years in order to keep an NBA team. It's telling, right? Because, we were looking at a soccer stadium in Europe that a friend, Eric, was showing us, and it was this stadium that's been there for hundreds of years, and you have to walk through all this urban fabric, and is it fancy? Does it have the biggest screen of everywhere? No. But boy, it has a story to it. It has meaning. It has connection to the community. And I'm like, I would pay double for a stadium if we were going to be like, hell, let's build a stadium that's not going to have to be rebuilt in 30 years. Let's make it last 200 years. And that's not just the physical materials, it's the durability. And it's making it not just about the technology. I remember when the Dallas Cowboys Stadium came out and they were like, it's the biggest screen in the world. And everyone's excited. It's like, well, 2 years later, someone's beat you to that. So you're never going to win that game.
And you talk about sustainability through durability, and a big part of that's environmental sustainability, but it's also fiscal sustainability for a city or a family. The stadium analogy, I think, speaks for itself, how many, tens and hundreds of millions get pumped into projects like that. And we very much support the Thunder in Oklahoma City. And I think in this instance, doing what it took to keep them is probably worth it. But if we take the analogy down to a smaller scale, and your family's building a house, are you building something that your kids are going to have to tear down or pump another $100,000-$200,000 into when they inherit it from you? Or is this something that is going to be passing down wealth, and then that money can be used for something else?
Yeah.
Because one model is a lot more sustainable for families and cities than another. And we could think about that with construction, but also urbanism. Are we going to keep building these sprawling suburbs that are not sustainable environmentally, but also not fiscally? We've built tons of roads in cities across America that will never be maintained because there'll never be money to maintain them. So we zooming back in, and how can we build for people to flourish now, but also decades and centuries in the future?
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing, but we'll wrap up with this because we could go on for an hour about the vision, but that's what's kind of cool is the vision is human flourishing, and that's kind of like the long guidepost, and every decision we make is how do we, get there, I guess you could say, in everything that we do. But I also want to be really clear as we critique things, we're not trying to be armchair quarterbacks. Like, we're out there doing real work, and so we're telling you what we see and what we think, and there's other great people doing great work, and we're constantly changing our minds. Like, I don't mean we're flip-flopping, but we're always adjusting our thinking based on new information. You might put a comment in here and say something we go, oh, we hadn't thought of that. So I would say that the story of building culture and the vision of building culture is also always unfolding over time. And it's a living document.
Yeah, that's one of our core values is seeking truth, whether or not we're right or wrong. And that's, kind of always learning and something we're passionate about.
Yeah, it's not an adherence to masonry. That's so important. It is not an adherence to masonry. It's an adherence to how do we build to last? And that can mean different things in different places at different price points.
Thank you for joining us for our first Q&A. You sent some great questions in. If we didn't get to your question this time, we'll be doing this again next month, so keep sending them in. And in the meantime, hope everyone has a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. We'll see you for episode 2 in the new year.
Merry Christmas, everyone.